know me who've been to these before. I'm Trevor Clements. I'm the training and development principal these days at Hertfordshire Building Control. And yeah, some of you will be relieved to hear that I'm not the principal speaker today, as you've heard. We've got Jayne Hall. Jayne joined us as our head of quality and compliance in January, and we're really delighted to recruit her. Just to tell you a little bit about her before she starts speaking, she cut her teeth in the West Country as a building control surveyor. So she sort of, came from the sharp end of building control. She gravitated to management down that way at South Gloucester Council. Some of you may know her name, and most people in building control know Jayne because she was a past president of local authority building control. So a very prestigious year and an appointment there. But also she doubled that up with presidency of the Chartered Association of Building Engineers as well. So as you'll understand, she brings a huge wealth of experience and knowledge to our company, and delighted that this afternoon she's going to impart some of that to you in just a moment. So as you see, the topic is the legislation landscape. Crikey, I should have practiced that one. Tongue twister. Take it away, Jayne.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Trevor, for that fabulous introduction. I couldn't have had a better introduction than that. So I'm going to see if my actual controls work here. And here we are. So for some of you may already know me, of course, but for those who don't, I have been working in the construction industry since I left school. I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was. I did my A-levels, and then I decided university was not for me, and I started training as an architectural technician with a small practice, moving on to the local authority architects department back in the day when they had them, and I completed my qualifications on day release, and between 1990 and 2003 I actually went self-employed for a bit, and I ran my own small design consultancy, married an architect and had a couple of children. Unfortunately, my circumstances changed, and I took a sidestep with my career into building control, and I joined my local authority as an assistant building control surveyor, and I am living proof that it's not too late to have a fresh start. I think my experience has been primarily public sector, but I have had some time working in the private sector, and I've seen constant change pretty much over the years. So my presentation today will likely cover a lot of ground that you already know, but bear with me because I want to set the scene. And so if you think of this as an opportunity to refresh your knowledge and see the current situation in the building control environment in context with what went before. So I'm going to talk a bit about the history of the building control in England and Wales and how it interacts with other construction legislation. I'm going to touch on the two systems, well, three really, but the two systems of building control, we always think of it as two, but there's the competent person schemes as well, isn't there? So I call it three. But so I want to just touch on those and the differences between the two, and obviously look at the primary, secondary legislation and guidance. And I want to explore how the Building Safety Act came about, and the role of the building safety regulator. The registration of building control professionals, which is a very important change to our profession. And if I've got time left, I might touch on the delivery enforcement of building control and how that might look moving forward. So here we go. Ancient and modern times. So building controls, it's just one of many controls on design, construction and the use of buildings. And the nature of development and building work means that the different rules and regulations will often overlap and sometimes might contradict each other. I've got these two pictures here really just to show the contrast, because construction is a very ancient human activity, and it began with our functional need to provide shelter, a controlled environment to moderate the effects of the climate. It's not changed much over the years, has it? So looking back over time, we know there is archaeological evidence of human settlements dating back to the earliest civilizations around 5,000 years ago. And examples of ancient buildings, temples, fortresses, they still exist around the world today. Now, this one here, I don't know if you can see my little mouse, probably not, but if you can't, that there is in Orkney in Scotland. It's called the Nap of Hower. I think I pronounced that right. Some of the Scottish accent might make it sound better, but it survives almost intact today as an example of an early dwelling. And so it's a dwelling house. Archaeologists believe the larger of the two buildings was used as a main house, and they were linked by a passage, and the smaller structure was divided into 3 compartments, and the archaeological boffins think that it may have been a store or a workshop, and it still exists today. And of course, we know all about the Egyptian pyramids and the ziggurats and the Greek temples and the Roman amphitheatres. Much of it produced by slave labour, unfortunately. But I mean, again, modern day, we've got modern slavery, haven't we? That's a bit of a blight on the construction industry, but that's another subject. But we can't say if there was any formalised construction laws surrounding these very ancient buildings, but we do know that Babylonian King Hammurabi introduced regulation during his reign in 1750 BC. And these are probably the earliest laws relating to construction, based on a justice system of retribution. For example, a builder whose work was so faulty as to cause the collapse of a building or the death of its owner could expect to receive the death penalty. But in the main, Hammurabi's code established the concept of civil damages, whereby one must pay compensation for defective work, not always with your life, maybe just a limb, or just perhaps if it fell down and didn't hurt anyone, you might have to build it back up at your own cost. But that concept is something that has survived to this day. And in researching this, it's been interesting going back on this. It's been a bit of revision for me, and I'm hoping it's going to be interesting to you, and not a day that you will never get back again. Anyway, moving on, in England, of course, further controls were introduced by the Romans, and by the Middle Ages, regulation took the form of local acts. In 1189, the earliest building bylaws were made in London. And the London Building Act arose from the ashes of the Great Fire of London in 1667. And modern day building regulations are still primarily intended to protect the public health, safety and general welfare. I've put a picture here because this is in Watchet, which is where I live, and this is a very modern building. As you can see, it's a steel frame and a concrete, poured concrete construction. Or deconstruction, as you might think. It split the local community in 2, but it has just been judged the Building of the Year in the local REBA Regional Awards in 2023. So we're all quite proud of it here. But it just goes to show that you know, even today, you know, we're building stuff, and we need to have rules and regulations and codes and standards so that we do it right. So moving on. So I've done a little timeline here, just thinking about how we actually got here, you know, from back in the days of Hammurabi right up to, you know, 2022, 23, where we are now. And you'll see my little symbols on there. I thought I was being clever. I'm not a graphic designer, but the little bricks are intended to show sort of structure. The flames are showing fire, and the little chaps in the middle are bugs, because you know, catastrophic fires and structural failures are a theme in this presentation, as public protection laws evolved in order to prevent a repeat of the terrible losses of life. And it is common to hear the words, "This must never happen again," after such tragedies, and regulation is the route that successive governments back from, you know, prehistory right up to modern day have taken to ensure this. And of course, some of us, and it's probably usually people like me who sort of get accused of wearing rose-tinted spectacles and carrying a half-full glass, we might say everyone involved in the erection of a building was, if they were competent and mindful to do the right thing and not cut corners or try to bend the rules, and to keep safety and sustainability and access for all at the heart of what we do, then the built environment would be a better place, free from failures and disasters. But we are in the real world and subject to errors and mistakes and miscommunications. acts of terrorism, natural disasters, and unintentional consequences. And fire has been a common theme and is one of the key drivers in how legislation evolved in England. There was a great fire in London during the reign of Richard I, and it led to the 1189 building ordinances, which made stone compulsory in party walls between buildings. But otherwise anything went, and wood and straw were commonplace. So by 1212, there was another disastrous fire, and so there was a further fire safety measures, and they started to license ale houses. They commanded that all new roofs were to be of tiles or shingles or boards, and existing reed and rush roofs were to be plastered within 8 days or demolished. And there were aldermen and lawful men who would go out round and check. In Bristol, the first building inspectors arrived on the scene in 1391 to check for encroachment. And in Worcester, the 1467 ordinances ruled there were to be no thatch roofs or timber chimneys. Well, who'd have thought timber chimneys, eh? Good idea not to have them. So they weren't to be any of that within the city walls. But of course, we had lack of space and overcrowding, and it still meant timber jettied homes were commonplace. And of course, we all know the Great Fire of London in 1666 laid waste to 80% of the city. And from this, the London Building Act of 1667 became the first laws to provide for surveyors to enforce its regulations. And all houses within the walled city of London were to be built in brick or stone. The thicknesses of walls, the numbers of stories, the widths of streets were carefully specified in order to prevent the spread of fire. And we had further acts in 1707 and 1709, and that extended that control out to Westminster. And by 1774, a comprehensive building act covered the whole of the built-up area of London, with a further prescriptive rule prohibiting timber cornices, requiring brick parapets up to 2.5 feet above the garret story, and windows and doors were to be recessed a minimum of 4 inches from the front of the building. And there are actually surveyors' records dating from 1774 still held in the London Metropolitan Archives. So I find it really interesting because actually the bones of it are still the same today. You know, we're still looking to prevent fire and make our buildings safe by regulation and standards. So the London Building Act, it became a prototype for other English towns where building related problems were addressed through local improvement acts, and building acts were passed for cities such as Bristol and Liverpool. And by 1845, nearly 400 improvement acts were passed for 208 towns in England and Wales, and they concerned issues ranging from street cleaning and lighting and widths of new roads. In the early Victorian period, the focus moved to overcrowding. So we were smack in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. There's a lack of water and sanitation, and we saw the first Public Health Act in 1848, and it was laid out in the framework for local authority boards of health. And the Local Government Act of 1858 extended the powers of the local authorities to regulate the construction of buildings through bylaws, including the requirement for the deposit of plans. So, information provision started to come to the fore. And in actual fact, many records survive from this period. But the unfortunate thing was the bylaws could vary from one local authority to another. So in 1965, the first national building regulations were published, and they were under the Public Health Act 1961. That was their primary legislation that sat above those regulations in 1965. And they covered the whole of England and Wales, with the exception of the inner London boroughs. And they were a set of prescriptive standards that had to be followed. I've got a little excerpt here that I'm going to read to you. A person who intends to erect a building, alter or extend a building, install fittings or make any material change in its use shall, if the regulations apply to what is proposed, deposit plans, sections, specifications and written particulars with the local authority. And a little bit further on, if proper notice is not given, the builder may be asked, it also specified the notice period that they had to give. If once you'd started work, you would have to let the local authority know at certain times, and that was in existence right up until 2010. I think they sort of got rid of all of that. But if proper notice wasn't given, the builder may be asked to open up or pull down work or fittings so that the local authority can check the regulations have not been contravened. And the Public Health Act provides that if the regulations are contravened, the local authority may require the owner either to pull down or remove the work or alter it, or to make it comply with the building regulations. And if he fails to do so, they may remove the work themselves and recover the expense of doing so. Again, very similar to the rules today. The Public Health Act provides that if a person contravenes the regulations, he'll be liable to a fine not exceeding £100 and to a further fine not exceeding £10 a day after conviction, as long as the default continues. So I don't know how onerous £100 was in 1965, but I know that one of the problems that we've had with enforcement of building control in more recent years is actually the tools that we have, and the fact that the primary legislation sets the limitations of the fines has been hamstrung us. I think people have seen that actually, it's cheaper to just do it wrong than it is to try to get it right, because the fines were not sufficient a deterrent. But things have changed now, and I'll come on to that. Of course, this was all long before my time, this 1965 stuff. I think I might have just been born. But much has changed since then, but as you probably notice, quite a lot has stayed the same. So there was significant events in our history that also led to legislation change. I've pinched a few pictures off the internet here. Don't tell anyone, they're probably copyrighted. I think some have got the little what they call them, watermarks in. I just pop them up there quickly for today. The post-war trend in high-rise architecture, that was a cutting-edge solution at the time to rehoming many of the households affected by the loss of homes during the Blitz years. So as if people hadn't gone through enough, then they were stuffed into, stacked on top of one another well, I think they were very well received at the time, these very modern, spacious apartments with fabulous views. And interestingly, we don't seem to have done quite as well as some of the, luxury skyscrapers and penthouses in the States. But, we seem to have managed to home most of our sort of poorer and more vulnerable households in these types of accommodation in the main. But there was an absolute catastrophe in 1968 where just 2 years after it was completed, a gas explosion caused a catastrophic collapse of the 22-storey Ronan Point. And it is a standard case in most of us who've done our building HNCs and degrees in building surveying will have probably had to look at some of these cases. There was a death toll of 4, but as you can see from that picture, it could have been so much worse. And the inquest of that led to the Building Fifth Amendment regulations in 1970. And the government's response to this inquest was a subject that was so hotly debated in the House of Commons at the time, particularly where the conclusions of the inquiry were judged by the engineering profession as being unfair and harmful to the construction industry. Where there were concerns raised that the new regulations may not produce safety, and yet they may cost the building industry and therefore the public a great sum of money. And there may be some sort of echoes of that in some things that we've witnessed more recently. Local authorities after this event were required to carry out an investigation of their high-rise properties. I think that might have happened recently too. And they had to check that their primary structure could take a load of £5 per square inch, and gas supplies to those types of buildings were also cut off. But of course, the building regulations themselves, they weren't retrospective. They're still not retrospective. Existing buildings could and still can stay as they are if there's no material change of use that triggers a requirement to meet the current regulations, or if a material alteration doesn't result in any non-compliance being greater than previously existing. So in the case of the fire that destroyed the Rose and Crown Hotel in Saffron Walden in 1969, there's nothing the building regs could do about it, but the resulting Fire Precautions Act in 1971 required that any premises used as a hotel or boarding house for more than 6 people must have a fire certificate. And most of these designated buildings were also subject to the Fire Precautions Workplace regulations. Then, of course, there are tragic sporting disasters. I put Ibrox there, but actually researching it brought quite a lump to my throat, because quite a lot of these events occurred in the 80s, which were in, I was in my teens then, and I can clearly remember some of the events. Ibrox Park here, where Stairway 13 claimed the lives of 66 spectators. That led to the Safety at Sports Grounds Act in 1975 and the introduction of safety certificates. But there were more terrible disasters through the 1980s and led to further revisions to regulations and fire safety legislation. We probably remember 56 people lost their lives in the Bradford Stadium fire in 1985. There were 31 perished at King's Cross Underground Station fire in 87. There were 97 people crushed to death at Hillsborough Stadium in 1989. And I don't know if people involved in that feel they have had justice, but it has taken a very long time. And they're still rumbling on very recently. And then moving forward to 2009, we saw Lakanal House aflame on our TV screens, where a fire starting in an electrical appliance on the 9th floor flat spread rapidly and uncontained through the building, and it trapped 3 women and 3 young children on the 10th and 11th floors. And the inquest showed that these were 6 avoidable deaths that should never have happened. At the time, I think Harriet Harman said that was an absolute tragedy, but I think the absolute tragedy with this is that the lessons were not learnt until it was too late. So, moving back to my timeline, the next significant change to the regulations that I hadn't talked about was the Building Act in 1984. So after our first national building regulations and the 5th Amendment in 1970, then came along the 1984 Building Act, and it consolidated previous legislation concerning the construction process and the design and specification for buildings and their component parts and related matters in England and Wales. And as the primary legislation, it enabled detailed regulations to be made as secondary legislation. That's what we call the building regulations. And they can be made and revised and removed and replaced by the UK Secretary of State in England. In Wales, they have their own regulations now. And the building regulations that have been made under the Building Act have been periodically updated, rewritten or consolidated. But back in 1984, there were some significant changes to the modern system of building control that were introduced. Michael Heseltine, who was then the Secretary of State for the Environment, he'd stirred up a bit of debate, and he proposed that the building control system should be self-regulating with minimum government interference. It should be self-financing and also simple to operate. And what arose was his proposal for independent qualified professionals to work alongside the existing local authority system within a legislative framework where regulations could be easily updated, disputes could be more easily resolved, and administrative procedures could be streamlined. And it encouraged greater involvement from professionals in the industry. And the first private sector approved inspector to be appointed and registered was the NHBC in 1985. And since then, the regulations have been further developed and additional approved inspectors have been registered with functions primarily governed by the Building Act, which is our primary legislation, and the approved inspectors, etc. regulations. And this is the system that we've become accustomed to. It's been with us since 1985 with NHBC and more broadly since 1997. And although there can be a lot of debate about whether competition and the being able to choose your building control provider has been good or bad for the industry. I think what we can say is that it has bedded in well, and I don't think the local authorities would have survived without the approved inspectors to pick up the slack, because the cuts and austerity that they've been subjected to over the years has meant actually they probably would have struggled. But anyway, another significant change back in 1984 is the introduction of the approved documents. Now I remember that because I just started with my private architect practice in well, it wasn't my practice, but I started working there as a trainee architectural technician, and I can remember the day we had our new set of documentation delivered, and it was quite there was quite a lot of commotion in the office, having a nose around the new approved documents, which have again served us very well. They've given us very detailed guidance. They have been accused of being difficult to understand in some cases, but generally they are quite a good rule book. There's 18 separate headings, I believe, Part A to Part R, and they cover aspects such as, well, of course, we've got Part S now, haven't we, as well? Is that RS? Yeah. S was introduced last year, and they cover aspects of workmanship, materials, structure, waterproofing, weatherproofing, fire safety, means of escape, sound insulation, ventilation, potable water supplies, drainage, protection from falling, sanitary facilities, accessibility for disabled, electrical safety, security of the building, and high-speed broadband, which hasn't reached Watch It yet, I'm afraid. But there we go. But I do remember when I started my steep learning curve as a trainee building control surveyor, there were virtually annual revisions to the approved documents. I can remember Part E and the introduction of sound testing was my rude awakening to the world of compliance. And it was only halted when the government of the day launched their deregulatory red tape challenge in 2011. I remember the Prime Minister of the day famously challenged the public to help cut unnecessary regulations, saying there are over 21,000 statutory rules and regs in force, and I want us to bring that number and the burden it represents down. Indeed, I want to be the first government in modern history to leave office having reduced the overall burden of regulation rather than increasing it. Unfortunately, we now know that the 1 in 2 out had some unintended consequences. For instance, the abolition of the Code for Sustainable Homes in March 2015 in order to reduce the cost and complexity of building homes in England. I think that could possibly be reviewed as a retrograde step. That's my personal opinion there. So there we go. I think I've sort of done that to death, my little timeline, but I'm very proud of it because I think it's quite a nice little graphic. But we're here now. We're up in 2022 and over 2023 now, and I'm going to be talking now about what happened after another nasty fire. And so I'm just going to move my slides along. Here we go. Just slip past them. I might come back to these later. So, but I'm conscious of the time because we've only got about 45 minutes. So I think I better move on to the Building Safety Act here. So here we go. Where we are now. Well, it's just over, what is it? Just over 6 years 72 people lost their lives in this inferno. I saw it just before I got into bed on the 13th of June. I think it was on Facebook, and when I woke up 14th of June, this fire had almost destroyed this building. And again, I will never forget this, and I don't think anybody should. The death toll included 15 disabled residents housed in a multi-storey building with no means other than the lift to get in and out of their homes. There were 17 children. One was just 6 months old, and another child never even had the opportunity to breathe the air here. So a very, very, very sad and tragic affair. And it seems to have been dragging on a long time, and we're still waiting for the outcome of the inquiry on this one. But as a as a sort of reaction to this fire, the government did commission Dame Judith Hackett to carry out an independent review of the building control and fire safety. It was she was looking at, and coming from a health and safety background, it was quite interesting to sort of see it from her point of view. So it's easy to get wrapped up in what's happening currently and forget the origins of where we are today. So if we revisit her independent review, it's clear it was her ability to view things through this lens of her health and safety professional thing, to identify what had gone wrong. And so she there were 8 key recommendations arising from what she saw. She felt that the regulatory framework wasn't fit for purpose, and so that needed to be addressed. She felt that there were, a lot of buck passing. There were no real clear responsibilities. And she warned that there was a lack of clarity of roles, and that this building safety was one of the one of the key things that had been sort of ignored when it came to Grenfell Tower. She felt that we should have a clear and identified duty holder with the responsibility for the safety of the whole building. There were 3 gateways she suggested there should be, that when building a building, that we should look at, and I'll look at those shortly. They would be points at which people would be able to stop and take stock whether actually everything is being considered correctly. And more rigorous enforcement. She felt that the enforcement powers, certainly building control enforcement powers, were inadequate, and a wider and more flexible range of powers ought to be created. Higher competence level. Now, this is the big key word at the moment, competency, and the construction sector and the fire safety sector need to demonstrate more effective leadership for ensuring building safety among the key roles. We now have competency matrices, and the Health and Safety Executive have published their BICOF, which is the Building Inspectors Competency Framework, which we've waited for a long time, but we've got it now. It came out in April. And more effective product testing. And I think we will see that the Building Safety Act has introduced this for us now. So there should be clear statements on what systems products can and cannot be used for, with their use made essential, and the scope of testing and application of products in systems. So there we are. And the final thing was better information and better procurement. So the golden thread we hear a lot about, that is ensuring that information is available and clearly accessible to all those who need it in the right place at the right time. So last year, just over a year ago, the Building Safety Act was granted royal assent. So it's been with us over a year now, and the main function of that was to create a building safety regulator. So it was a health and safety executive was named as the building safety regulator. There were three main functions: to oversee the safety and standards of all buildings, to help and encourage the built environment industry and building control professionals to improve their competence, and to lead on the implementation of a new regulatory framework for high-rise buildings. And all of those we are seeing coming into effect now. In April 2023, we saw mandatory registration of high-rise residential buildings, and this will have to be completed by 30th of September this year. So that's just 6 months, after which it will be an offence for non-registered high-risk buildings to be occupied. Now, these are buildings that are 18 metres high or over 7 stories high, and they include hospitals and care homes. And I'm so sorry, excuse me. So there's quite stringent rules are being introduced here for the registration. It has to be information provided that goes along. Oh, I'm so sorry.
If you drop more gin, Jane, that will help you.
I'll just get the gin out. Oh dear. Oh. Anyway, so so we've got the introduction of responsible people as well for all of this. So sorry, my notes have slipped off my page and I've lost my plot. I'm going to move along to the next slide. Oops. So here we are. I've talked about the Building Safety Act. I've talked about the Building Safety Regulator, registration of high-risk buildings, which has floored me completely. I'm going to move on to validation of competency in the registration of building control bodies, because I'm a bit more familiar with that. So another thing that has arisen from the Building Safety Act is the protection of the profession of building control inspectors, and this is because there is a real requirement for people to have or regain confidence in the people who are checking the work that's being done out there. And so we've been told for quite some time now that we're going to have to prove our competencies, and the Building Safety Regulator has just released their BICOF, which is the Building Inspectors Competency Framework. And there are, we are told, 3, perhaps 4 levels of or classes of competency that will be open to us to register, those of us working in the profession. And class 1 is the trainee, class 2 will be your building control surveyor, and there are suggestions that that might be split into 2 different sort of sections, perhaps to cover that very, very broad range of work that we do, whether that's residential or commercial, small scale and low rise. And then there's the class 3, which is our specialists, and those are the types of people we are expecting to see be working on high risk, high rise buildings. Building control bodies, which are local authorities and approved inspectors, will have to be registered. Now, local authorities won't have to go through the formal registration process, but the Building Safety Regulator will be holding a register of all building control bodies or approved inspectors, which will now become registered building control approvers, and the people who work for them carrying out the sort of functional duties of building control will be registered building control inspectors, and we'll have to register under one of those classes. I think there's going to be a class 4 as well, which is going to cover the specialist management type role. So we'll see that arising coming forwards. And there are, as I speak today, think there is still only one scheme that has been open to through which people can get their competency validated, and through which they can register. They can assess which level they can register at and get the registration process rolling, and that's the LABC scheme, where they've set up the Building Safety Competence Foundation. I know that there are schemes being put forward by ACAI and CABE. As far as I know, they're still waiting to hear whether they have been approved, given the rubber stamp of approval by the building safety regulator. But those are hopefully going to come into play and be ready to roll before the 1st of October, which is when registration opens. And again, like the high-rise residential buildings, we're only going to be having 6 months before the law kicks into place. The thing I forgot to mention about the building safety regulator is it does change the whole of the way building control is delivered, because in actual fact the building safety regulator will become the building control body for these in-scope buildings, which are these high-rise high-rise buildings of 18 meters or 7 stories or more. So that is definitely going to be a significant change for us. Now, I did say I was going to talk about the gateways. Oh, that's why I didn't mention it, because it's on this slide, the statutory consultee for planning applications. Yes, the building safety regulator is also a statutory consultee for planning applications at the first of their gateways, which is Gateway 1. These gateways are intended to be sort of a stop-go positions, really. So when you're putting in a planning application for a new building that is in scope, those are 18 meters or 7 stories or higher, the Gateway 1 kicks in, and this is a requirement that you provide certain fire safety information with your planning application, and it would be in a prescribed form, and the building safety regulator does get to have a say over those applications, and this has been in effect now since last April. You know, it should be bedding in, and I don't know, you know, whether it's caused any sort of developers to pull out of high rise. You know, I think probably the introduction of the second stairway in high rise buildings has perhaps had more impact, because that takes away some of the space on each story, so perhaps makes a project less financially tenable. But I think the industry in the main has accepted and adopted these changes with good faith. The building safety regulator is also the building control authority for these in-scope buildings, and with that comes Gateway 2, which is seriously more onerous for everybody involved. It really does front load the process. At the moment, where you're putting in building regulations, it's something that you can get a conditional approval, or you can work with your building control provider to determine compliance as you go along, as decisions are being made. That is going to be pulled right from under everybody's feet. The Gateway 2 will require that sufficient information is provided through this golden thread of information to ensure that you can assess from the plans and specifications and proposals that the proposed building is going to comply with all the relevant building regulations requirements. And that isn't just the fire safety ones, that is everything across the board. And until it gets that stamp of approval, there is no way that commencement on site can be undertaken. So this change is going to come into fruition on in April next year, when we've got all the building control professionals, all the building and control inspectors are registered, and all the building control approvers are registered and ready to go. And people won't be able to go to their local authority or go to an approved inspector anymore. They have to go to the building safety regulator for that building control. And I foresee this is going to stretch out well beyond in-scope buildings in the years to come. And that health and safety executive, as the building safety regulator, will have more and more control over the building regulation functions moving forward. But for the time being, we've got the gateway 2 there, which means that you cannot start your building until you've got those approvals in place. And the building safety regulator will have 12 weeks to assess your proposals for compliance. That's 3 months. That's significantly longer than currently, where it's 5 in local authority. It's 5 weeks or 8 with the consent of the applicant. But that's not just the that's not where it stops. Once you've got your building approved and you can start building it, obviously it's subject to the same sort of checks and measures and information being provided along the way. But more importantly, the key duty holders are, at the end of the project, when they think they're complete, have to sign a declaration to say that they believe the building is compliant with the regulations, and that's before the inspectors come out and cast their eyes over it. And again, this is gateway 3. I haven't written it on the slide. I thought I had, but it's not there anymore. So, but gateway 3 is the occupation stage, and again, it's a stop position where you can't do anything until you've got your approval to allow people to occupy the building. And again, building safety regulator has 12 weeks from your notification that you believe the building is complete and compliant to do their own checks, run their own inspections, and if they're satisfied, they will give you the go ahead, and the building may be occupied. Of course, it will have to go on the register, which the building safety regulator holds. All existing occupied high-rise residential buildings have to be on that register. As I said, the registration opened in April and continues up until October this year, after which it's an offence not to be registered. And the same will go for new buildings. They'll have to go on the register as well. And the requirement is that if any changes that are made to those buildings will go through that same route. So if there's any modifications to the buildings that require building regulations approval, they will have to go through the building safety regulator, through that gateway 2 process of approval before they can commence the work, and then again before the building can be occupied, or the amended parts of that building can be occupied at gateway 3. I was going to move on to enforcement. How are we doing for time? I've done 50 minutes. Do I have to stop yet? Has anyone pulled the plug on me? So enforcement, there are enhanced powers in enforcement that have been introduced in the new Building Safety Act. The key ones being contravention notices and stop notices. I would imagine that they will be used. We're dealing with the health and safety executive here, and they are no strangers to prosecutions. So my crystal ball says that enforcement is going to be something that happens a lot more visibly in future. The tools are there to enable it to be effective. So I think this will be something that we need to watch this space, and I probably need to do a better prepared presentation on enforcement alone in the near future. But for the meantime, whoops, hang on. sorry, key points and timescales. Here we are. So we've got our validations of competency coming in on the 1st of October 2023. That's for all building control professions. And I must say that I must make anybody who feels like they might be wanting to get a high vis on and don a clipboard after that time, it will be a criminal offence to impersonate a building control inspector. So the registration of building control inspectors happens between the 1st of October and the 1st of April next year. We've got registration of building control approvers, again, same time scale, to October 23 to April 2024. The key thing I would say to people if they're thinking or being concerned about this is don't worry, it's got to be a good thing. It's going to elevate our profession. It's going to make us more visible. It's going to make us you know, raise our profile in the eyes of the people, and perhaps you know, give the public back that confidence in us. I think if you're preparing to go through the competency validation, get your CPD up to date, make sure you've got records of that to hand, because you'll probably need it to prove your competency, together with any very interesting case studies. So build yourself a little portfolio of experience as well. I would highly recommend that is something that any building control inspectors or approved inspectors out there who are sort of wondering, you know, what it's going to mean. That's the key things I would say that you've got to concentrate on getting together, because you know, you can evidence your competency that route. Obviously, we've got to prepare ourselves for the Building Safety Regulators Gateway too. I think the wider industry is going to really feel that. You know, it's, I mean, if you're doing the right thing, it's something we should be always doing, you know, is making sure that we've thought through our schemes and our proposals, and making sure that you know, what we're planning to do will be compliant. But you know, the way modern construction is, and the race against time that we've got, it doesn't always happen. And you know, with design and build and changes along the way, I think they're going to be seen less and less. I think there's going to have to be much more thought put into you know, construction, and perhaps people will stick to their plans in the future. I don't know, it'd be interesting to see some of the impacts. What we've got here, demonstrating compliance with current building regulations. Yes, that's what I was going to say. Is we have to demonstrate compliance with the whole lot, not just fire safety. Even though this has arisen from a tragic fire, and it was fire safety that was, you know, the key issue, there is a lot more. I forgot to mention about the construction products as well. There's new legislation covering construction products, and future-proofing for the future home standards. That's coming into force in 2025 as well, because we've also got to think of our environment and sustainability. I'm just going to ask the question, will all of this regulation deliver the compliant, safe, sustainable, accessible, comfortable homes we need, and are we ready for it? That's it from me. Thank you very much for listening, if you're still with me. Well, I'm very delighted. I'm going to stop sharing now, and wish you all well.
Thank you, Jayne. Thank you. We do have a question in the Q&A, if we do that one first, and then we've got a couple more statements actually in the chat. So if we go to the Q&A first, it's just been somebody else, Gareth said, jumped in. Thank you, Gareth. Said it used to be 2 years for enforcement. Is this now going to be 10 years? Gareth says yes, 10 years enforcement period.
Oh yes, yeah, and I think there is room for people to go back 30 years. Is it? I don't know. It's quite it's quite a big change from what we're used to. Because we used to only be able to, like you say, the offence 2 years from the date of the offence, or 6 months from the date of it being discovered, which really didn't give us time, given the, you know, given that the defence of a lot of people was, I haven't finished yet, Your Honour. So, I mean, I think enforcement is going to, this is going to change the face of enforcement because of our time, the timescales in which we can sort of take action, you know, will be larger. And, you know, I hope that it'll mean that it will allow us to get a more level playing field and sort the good builders from the bad builders. You know, that's what's really been lacking over the last few years. Is well, many years actually. I've been in building control 20 years now. I came in 2003. It's now 2023. 20 years. It was only my very short period of time in around 2018 at South Gloucestershire Building Control, where we took a few sort of successful electrical safety cases to court with our trading standards colleagues. But other than that, I haven't personally seen a great deal of enforcement taken through to court. Most of it's been informal, you know, powers of persuasion and you know, withholding important certification until they sort it out. I think we'll start seeing things going through the courts again.
I wonder, Jayne, because I mean, it is criminal law, and that means we have the cumbersome legal process under PACE that we have to follow, and you've got to almost retrain surveyors to be police officers, you know, so that evidence is admissible, so that they're skilled enough to properly present prosecution files, and of course local authority lawyers have got to get up to speed as well. So I'm possibly a little less confident that we'll see all these cases in the headlines, but in a year's time you can say I told you so. And
well, I think I don't know. I think we need to see it. I think the public are looking for it. You know, they're looking for us to start sort of you know, beating people with the stick. You know, the carrot works to a degree, and I think the carrot works very well actually. You know, I'd never smacked my children, and they're perfectly competent and law-abiding
so
adults.
am mine, but I used to belt the hell out of them. So, you know, that's no argument, is it? That's a joke.
Not really.
Okay, moving on before we go any further down that route. We've got some statements to go through in the chat. If I can move us on to that one, we've got feedback that Gateway 1's not great so far, apparently.
Probably not. No. I don't know. I haven't done any studying into that. It will be interesting, and I'm hoping that it gives our sort of students coming up through building surveying degrees plenty of fodder for dissertation material, isn't it? You know, some research into what difference things have made. I think I'm going to be really interested to see some of the stats coming back.
And some general worry about the percentage of building control inspectors leaving the profession. You know, it's reported that 40% of current building control officers could leave their roles. Who's going to be there to train the new people?
Well, I think, you know, I think that is a real risk. A lot of people are, I think, it hasn't helped that information has been sort of scant and contradictory and lacking. So that there's sort of confusion where perhaps there needn't be. There's concern where maybe there needn't be. I think forward-thinking businesses are training their own. I've worked a little bit in the private sector, and I'm working now at HPC, which has got a really strong trainee program, and we are seeing, you know, after the first 5 years, we're starting to see, you know, fully fledged surveyors coming out the other end of our training, and I know that's happening up and down the country. The encouragement of the sort of apprenticeship schemes, and of course the work that LABC are also doing by having brought in new trainees. I know that doesn't plug the entire gap, and that there's an awful lot of knowledge and experience that we stand to lose if people do decide to leave the profession. I just hope that the you know, the registration process is managed well and doesn't become too scary for people. I don't think we should be scared. We probably already are competent. It's just a case that we have to prove that. But you only have to prove it once, don't you? You know, to get onto that register, and then you have to maintain that competence through your continuing professional development, which is a requirement of all of us who belong to professional bodies anyway. So, I mean, I'm trying to sort of see it through my rose-tinted glasses, with my glass half full, and look at it as an opportunity to become a protected profession. I think it's got to be a good thing, and I hope some of those people who are sort of sitting on that fence thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to do it anymore, please don't be too tired. You've got a wealth of knowledge and you provide an absolutely invaluable role in the industry, even though it might be a small cog in the big wheel of things. You know, building control is valuable and it does make a difference in people's lives.
Thank you, Jane. Don's still here. Got his hand up. I'll pop you on, Don. Do you want to? Are you there, Don? Do you want to talk to us? No, it's not there. Okay, I'll move on to the next.
I think Don is muted, that's why.
Yeah.
Don, can you unmute? Are we allowed to unmute Don?
Yeah, I've asked to unmute. So
which one's Don?
Don Webb.
Can't tell which.
He might pop up.
2 men on the screen. No, maybe not.
Okay, so Jay asks, do hotels, HMOs over 18 metres fall under Gateway 2?
Yes.
Scrolling down.
Do you think Gateway 2 is ready, Jane? It's not far away, is it? October 23. Are they? Have you got any word on the street as to whether they're suitably equipped to deal with the applications when they come in?
Well, I don't really know. We don't hear about it. You know, it's not publicised very well, is it? You know, what people are doing in the background. I think all of you know, there have been some really sort of positive early adopters, and I certainly know that, you know, the people who are involved in the working groups, you know, who've put in their time as volunteers to get onto all these committees and things are sort of very positive and you know, accepting that this change is, you know, it's happening, you know, we might as well go with the flow rather than sort of be dragged kicking and screaming. But industry wise, I mean, I think lower down the chain, you know, perhaps people who are involved in the in-scope type of buildings are fully aware. They're usually going to be the bigger concerns. They're probably already using BIM and stuff like that. I'm more concerned for the sort of you know, the smaller medium enterprises who this is, you know, this is going to be a big shock to the system if you know, these changes that, you know, when they do filter down to the rest of the industry. But yeah, I think it will cause a problem. I don't think it helps that we've got you know, the economy, you know, the situation with the economy doesn't help. It puts lots of pressure on people. It does front load those you know, plans much more than they have been before. So I think, you know, it's quite hard to swallow, but you know, the building industry is quite lucrative. You know, if you build a decent compliant building and you reputationally it's going to be good for business if you do it right. You know, I don't see that they will lose in the long run, but in the short term, I think it might cause some problems, yeah. And it might cause some, there might also be some bottlenecks as well and delays. I mean, we only have to look at the planning process, the current planning process and getting planning approval and the delays that sometimes, you know, come along with that. I think, you know, I don't know. I think the industry is quite resilient, and I think you know, the ones that want to do it right will. The ones that don't want to do it right,
what comes?
Yeah.
Just to chip in just a correction, and I see Colin's picked up on it, that hotels, I think they possibly were considered early on, but they're not.
Oh no, sorry, it's care homes and hospitals. care homes and hospitals. I do apologise.
I think
I have been rabbiting
there's
on
enough
for an hour.
management controls not to worry so much about buildings like that. They're already quite regimented controls. But yeah, so thanks, Colin. Glad you're in the wings there, sorting this out. Good.
Is it someone's listening? That's the main thing.
Yeah, that's it. Colin's definitely awake.
Someone's commented, do you think it'll end up as building control surveyors having to have some sort of ID that they carry around to say that they're competent?
Yeah, big golden badge like the LAPD.
Oh, I don't know. It might be, mightn't it? You know, we might have shiny badge.
Someone
else will be held on a register. People will be able to look us up, won't they? You know, that's the trouble. You know, no different to currently. If people want to find out if you're any good, they can do. I don't think it's any more intrusive. But yeah, I mean, if we got a badge and a truncheon and a body armor, I think probably quite good. I don't know.
And then one final one. Do you think, I don't know if we'll know the answer to this, we haven't got any insider knowledge, but if you applied for a level 3 building inspector and didn't achieve that status, could you then request to be a level 2 instead? Would you sort of automatically be bumped to the lower level, or?
That's going to be down to the building safety regulator and their rules. What I want is to hopefully ensure that people aren't judged because we're only class 1. Oh, you're only a trainee. No, that's not right. You are a trainee and you're valuable. You're only class 2. It doesn't make people who have competencies in different areas better or worse than you. It's different. I can look at barn conversions till the cows come home. You know, that's I cut my teeth in Somerset, and that's mostly what we looked at: barn conversions, loft conversions, the occasional portal frame, as long as it wasn't the farmers, because it was exempt then. And but you couldn't put me in the shard and know what I'm doing. I absolutely hold my hands up to that. I will be a level 2 surveyor. That's if I'm not too out of date by being in management too long. But you know, so I don't know if you will automatically slot in. I think you will be slotted into whatever competency you can demonstrate you have, and whether they will look at whether they've got sufficient categories within those classes, I don't know, because it's very broad. You know, if you're looking at you know, if class 3 is everything over, you know, 18 meters or very complex buildings, what you've got everything in between exempt porches and conservatories to anything that isn't a complex and high-rise building is everything else, isn't it? So you know, it'll be I think there's going to be some brave people who are going to, you know, get registered first, and then they'll say, oh, it's not so bad, and the path will be clear for the rest of us to go go and you know, feel more confident about the process. It is scary. I see it. I get why there's some people who are thinking, you know, I'm coming to the tail end of my career. It's a bit like the electricians when Part P was introduced, wasn't it? You know, you had to be Part P registered.
Very quickly, because we're at 5:10 now, trying to round this off. We have one from a Gary Cass.
Oh no!
Yeah. Can you touch upon traditional arrangements for HRRBs, i.e. where works haven't commenced prior to BSR?
Could you say that again, please? Because I was so scared I wasn't listening.
Could you touch upon transitional? Sorry, I can't speak. Can you touch upon transitional arrangements for HRRBs where work, for instance, where work hasn't commenced prior to the BSR?
No. Do you know what? I can't without looking it up. I don't want to say anything and be wrong. I can't think of what those are.
Can I suggest something? We're getting a lot of comments from Colin. I know Colin Blatchford is involved in the HSE and the new regulator. And so here's an invitation, Colin. If you ever want to use this platform to tell everybody more about the new gateways and the process that you're setting up, feel free, get in touch with myself or Rachel, and we'd love you to, maybe you or a colleague, to you know, present to on one of these webinars. So just throw it in there.
Great stuff.
Well, hello,
Thank you.
Colin, and hello, Gary, and anybody else who I didn't think would be watching, who I'm glad I didn't know, because otherwise I'd have been in a mess.
No, we've had 171 people watching, Jayne.
That's absolutely fabulous. I hope I hope you don't go away thinking, well, that's another hour of my life I'll never get back. I hope you don't think that. I hope I've been at the very least entertaining, at the very least positive. If I don't know the answers and I've got it wrong and my notes have failed me, I do apologise. You know, I know where to find things out, and I'm very happy to deal with any other inquiries as they come in. If anyone else wants to throw me some questions, I'll give it a go. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you very, very much for all your time. I know it's sort of late in the day, and I do appreciate it, and I hope that it's been worthwhile for you all.
Thank you. I don't know